It's a pleasure to see all of you this morning. I'm glad that you're well enough to be with us. Lee's doing some better. In fact, I think considerably better than she was 2 or 3 weeks ago. She had put together some clothes to wear today, and she kind of ran out of steam, but possibly come tonight. So I'm hoping for that, and she is very much hoping that that'll be the case. We were able to go to Atmore yesterday and see the fellows on death row. Had a good study, had a good visit with James Barber, and a fairly lengthy visit. Things went well. His execution date's still July 20, and that's roughly 3 weeks. And but he was doing about as well as anybody could. And then we had a good study with about 6, I believe, altogether. Ben Brownfield, whom we baptized out of Donaldson, he's among those. And it went, I thought it went well, about as well as it could. We actually are going through the life of Christ. And we are trying, not knowing how long each one has to live, including myself. We're going in kind of a fast-forward way. We covered the years of preparation yesterday, and we're just hitting highlights. And they have actually what I did is I combined this first volume with the second volume that I have on this, made it one bigger one, which I think I may do in the future. But I told them just go ahead and read all the passages that deal with that, and then answer the questions, and whatever you have a question on, we'll try to answer it. But it went well, and so we're going into the beginning ministry in 2 weeks. If the Lord wills, 2 weeks from yesterday, we'll be able to do that. And I try to make the point that I make to everybody, and that is our purpose is not some kind of an academic approach, but we do want to be careful, and we do want to handle accurately the Word of God, but we want to see who Jesus is. When the Greeks came in John 12 and said, "Sir, we would see Jesus, who he is." And that's what we want to do. And that, of course, is the Waldron, the title for the Waldron booklet. "Sir, we would see Jesus." We want to know him. "This is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, in him whom thou didst send, even Jesus Christ." John 17:3. And so our purpose is to try to know God through Jesus Christ to the best of our ability, that we might appreciate who he is, and our love for him and would reciprocate, and we would be everything that he wants us to be. We try to grow to that end. Anyway, we're glad to be able to talk about that. In our readings this morning, we have gone from Psalm 80 through 95, which took us through yesterday's reading. We're not covering today. I just want to call attention just to a few. If you start with me at 80, Psalm 80, just leave that there. I'll get it in a second. Psalm 80, what is it about in a nutshell? God is requested to do what? That's right. Rescue his people, help his people. In 81, there's a contrast. God's goodness versus the people's what? The waywardness are rebuked. The time is unknown is one of the Psalms of Asaph, as well as Psalm 81 and 83. However, while the unjust judges are rebuked, there's a messianic, or not a messianic, but a statement that Jesus uses in verse 6. "Ye are gods, and all of you sons of the Most High." Now, the word gods, little g, you see, is applied to these judges. They were like gods to the people, in that they were supposed to be revealing God's ways to the people. And not idolatry, but they were just like miniature gods to the people. And all of you sons of the Most High. Jesus used that. Do you have a marginal reference as to where that's found in the New Testament? John 10, that's right. And Jesus is in heated argument with a bunch of Jews. And he said, if you said it's wrong for me to call myself the Son of God, then you need to look at your law. where, it says, you're sons of the Most High, and the scripture cannot be broken. If it were right for that to be, then how much more, Jesus says, would it be right for me to be called the Son of God? 83 is another imprecatory psalm in that God, the psalmist is calling God to do what? Do what, Paula?
Mine has a heading that says, "Plea for God to destroy evil victims."
Exactly, yeah, to destroy, and all of this, if you'll look at the end of 83, down to verse 15. So pursue them with thy tempest and terrify them with thy storm. Fill their faces with confusion, that they may seek your name, O Jehovah. Let them be put to shame and dismayed forever. Yea, let them be confounded and perish, that, purpose clause, that they may know that thou alone, whose name is Jehovah, art the Most High over all the earth. Let them understand through the vindication of your own righteousness and the vindication of the righteousness of the ways of those who follow you, that you are who you claim. There's a desire to do what in chapter 84? Beware. Or Psalm 84? To beware. Yes, in the house of the Lord. And verse 10 is a tremendous passage. For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. In essence, the contrast is I'd rather be a lowly person close to God than to enjoy all the benefits of what? What was that, Patty? The world, high society, in other words, yes. 85, there's a request for God's mercy on the nation. In 86, a psalm of supplication and trust the American Standard has as a topical reading. And then in 87, the benefits or privileges of a person dwelling where? In Zion. In 88, there is a prayer, a request to be saved. In 89, we have some messianic statements again. God's covenant, Jehovah's covenant with David and Israel's afflictions, the topical reading has, but I notice in 3 and 4, I have made a covenant with my chosen, I have sworn unto David my servant, thy seed will I establish forever, and build up thy throne to all generations. Of whom could that only speak? Jesus Christ. And notice again in verse 34, 35, 36, my covenant will I not break, or alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. Once have I sworn by my holiness, I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. Again, that's did the throne of David, the physical throne of David, end? It did. When? And who was the last king where really the sovereignty of the lineage of David ended? Jeconiah. That's right. Good answer. The last king in Judah, I asked this to the MH yesterday. The last king actually was not Jehoiakim or Jeconiah. It was Zedekiah, but he was one appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. And the last one, and the one of whom Jeremiah wrote in Jeremiah 22, that there will not be a descendant of Coniah who will be on the throne in Jerusalem and prosper. So it actually, Jeconiah, and then you had on down to Zedekiah, but Jeconiah was the last. So the point is, it could only be fulfilled in Jesus. All right, and the last one, in Psalm 90, is the only psalm we know that was written by whom? Moses. And it's a great, this is such a beautiful psalm. Again, I refer to the American Standard topical heading, God's eternity and man's transitoriness. The passing, and it has, even we have a song, which was one of my grandmother's favorites, down in the 10th verse. The days of our years are 80 years and 10, or even by reason of strength 80. That is, the average age of people, if they lived a good long life, was between what? 70 and 80. Yet is their pride but labor and sorrow, for it is soon gone, and we fly away. There's a song, as the life of a flower, as a breath or a sigh, so the years that we live as a dream hasten by. Y'all remember that song? And the idea there as we fly away, same idea in this psalm. So God is eternal, and yet we ourselves are short-lived. James says, what is your life? It is but a what? A vapor that appears for a little while and then what? Vanishes away. And so we ought to say, since that's the case, if the Lord wills, we'll do this or that. All right. Let's start putting my Bible over there. All right, let's go back to the life of Christ here. I wanted to run through, Jonathan, I'm just going to run through a few slides with me here, if you will. Here we go. All right. This, in our bigger picture of our study, we have the years of preparation, about how many? 30. Beginning ministry begins with what event? Jesus' baptism. Immediately tempted, and most of his work around Judea. All right? Then John is in prison over here in Machaerus, and then Jesus goes up, and we have the events of John 4, the woman at the well, and then Galilee makes Capernaum his headquarters, and then we have all these back and forth, Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida. And we'll come back to Bethsaida this morning, Lord willing. So all of this work, the healings on the Sabbath, the violation of the traditions of the Pharisees, all of those things he's done. He's called the 12 from among all the disciples and made them his apostles. The Sermon on the Mount is during this time. And the opposition begins to rise, but the popularity does too, until the point that Jesus feeds them over here in Capernaum, and they had been, the period of retirements have begun, but he's fed the 5,000, and they are enamored with him, and then he goes across, the disciples go across the sea. Well, let me just go ahead. Let's go here. We've got the Galilean, the retirements. We pointed out the times in various accounts where he withdrew or he departed, he left them. And so what we have then, in the first retirement, he goes to Bethsaida, and we have the feeding of the 5,000. And then he sends the disciples across the sea. He goes into the mountain to pray. And then he comes, and Paula knows what question I'm going to ask and what the answer to it. He comes at what watch of the night, Paula? The 4th, between 3 and 6 in the morning, somewhere around there. He comes to them, and then he walks on the sea. Peter tries, and then he comes back in the boat. They end up at Gennesaret, where they bring a lot of what kind of people to him? Sick, right, maimed, diseased, and so on. He heals everyone. He goes to Capernaum. So he walks on the water. Then he goes right up to Capernaum, and we have his "I am the bread of life" speech. All right. After that, he has some scribes for Jerusalem try to counter his influence, and we have the discussion concerning why do your disciples transgress the traditions of the elders, and we talked all about that. All right. Then we have him leaving Capernaum and the second retirement, and he goes into Phoenicia, Tyre, where he heals the Syrophoenician's daughter, right, and who had an evil spirit. And then he leaves there and goes into Sidon, but we don't have any record of what happened. And then he leaves Sidon and begins to come southward, the third retirement, through Decapolis, then across to Dalmanutha. He'll come over here, and what does he do on this east side of the Sea of Galilee? Feeds the 4,000. Good. Yes, he feeds the 4,000, and then he crosses to Dalmanutha. And as he crosses the sea, once he gets there, we have the argument that we discussed just Wednesday night when the Pharisees and Sadducees say, just give us a sign from heaven. And he said, well, isn't it strange that you can look up and you can determine if the skies are red and lowering, what's going to happen at night, what's going to happen in the morning, but you can't discern the signs of the times. You look at the heavens and you can basically, you see cause and effect. I didn't say it like this the other night. I was thinking about that yesterday and today. What Jesus, and this is throughout the Scripture, that the Lord expects us to be able to reason with His revelation. In fact, in Romans 1 verse 20, the invisible things of Him since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even His everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse. The things that are seen give evidence to things that we don't see. Here is the effect. There must be an adequate cause behind it. And so here is an orderly universe. There obviously was some divine power or a power behind it, wisdom behind it, orderliness behind it. It argues for that. And a person is blind not to see that. And we've heard all the examples, a watch, and it didn't just happen. There had to be somebody, intelligent who made. That's what the Lord demands of us. And it's like that's exactly what He's wanted them to see. Look, you can see, you look up at the skies, and you can see the cause, what's happening in the sun, and then you know what's going to happen with the weather conditions, the effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, and we'll see that even with here in just a moment. But anyway, I wanted to mention that, and we talked about that Wednesday night. And now, in this chart, we're over here in Dalmanutha, and then we're going up to Bethsaida. And at Bethsaida, I'm just going to take you through this real quickly. At Bethsaida, He's going to heal a blind man in a very peculiar way. It will be in 2 stages. And then He leaves Bethsaida, and He travels northward with His apostles to Caesarea Philippi. Very important time there. That's where we're going to hear about Him asking, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? All their different kinds of answers to that. And then He said, but who do you say I am? That's when Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then He predicts His death and resurrection. And then He goes a little farther north, and He travels to Mount Hermon, where it doesn't say Mount Hermon, but it's close by, and it's a high mountain apart from the others. And there he is transfigured before them. His face did shine as the sun. His garments became white as the light. Then He's going to leave this as far as He went, and He's going to return back down to Capernaum. And there's a lot of things that will happen in this. In fact, the 4th retirement, there's more that is recorded that Jesus did. He predicts His death a second time in Matthew 17. Then Peter was asked about paying the half shekel. Did your master pay the half shekel? And then the disciples argue about who is the greatest. And likely, according to Mark's account, it grew out of the idea that there's a person over here who's working miracles, but he's not an apostle. And one of them said, the Lord calls him not to do that. He's not among us. And Jesus answered that, but they were trying to maybe exclude certain disciples who should have been included. And so they argue about that. And then Jesus' brothers advise Him to go to Judea and show Himself to the world. And He does. So that's where we are. So we want to come back real quickly to where we are here, right here. And we've come over to on page 91 of our booklets, the 4th retirement, where he goes from Dalmanutha down up or north to Bethsaida. Bethsaida Julius, the Waldrons in their booklet call it, and others do too. That's to be distinguished between other Bethsaidas. That a lot of people believe there were at least two Bethsaidas. One possibly on the western side, the other one here maybe a mile and a half from the northeastern side of the shore of the Sea of Galilee. We have some of the apostles coming from there. Let's read, though, let's read the 2 accounts in Mark and Matthew. Matthew 16, 5 through 12. Let's read that first, and then we'll read Mark's account. Matthew 16, 5 through 12. Brother Charlie, if you would. Matthew 16, 5 through 12.
And the disciples came to the other side of the sea, but they had forgotten to bring any bread. And Jesus said to them, watch out and beware the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They began to discuss this among themselves, saying, he said that because we did not bring any bread. But Jesus, aware of this, said, you men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread? Do you not yet understand, or remember the 5 loaves and 5,000, feed the 5,000? How many baskets full were picked up? Or the 7 loaves and the 4,000, how many large baskets were picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of the bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees.
All right, thank you, Brother Charlie. Let's turn over to Mark's account. They forgot to bring what with them? Bread. We do learn that they had about how much with them? About a loaf. Yeah, so evidently not enough. And yet, when Jesus said, beware of it. Now, what has just happened? Keep the context before us. What had Jesus just been engaged in with some, Janet, what was that?
He was discussing with the scribes and the Pharisees who was the bread.
Exactly. They had actually asked for something from heaven, a sign from heaven. And that's when he said there's no sign given but Jonah. And he doesn't go into that. And he says you need, you can discuss or you can declare from what the face of the heavens are saying, what kind of weather conditions there will be. And yet you don't understand the signs of the time. You're blind. They were dull. But actually they were hypocritical. They did not want to accept what he had to say and who he was. All right. Now, they are like that. And the apostles have been hearing all of that. And, when you hear someone, here's a young person, and here's a person that they have some respect for, and he's arguing with us, maybe an older man who's a member of the church, and he said, do you really believe a person has to be baptized to be saved? You really believe that? You think instrumental music is a sin against God? You really think that? And then after there's parted, I don't think that ought just be let go. I think younger people especially, as well as, and then explain, hey, they don't understand that the authority of God is significant. And they understand that baptism is, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, was in the commission. It's seen all through the book of Acts. And a person to deny that, I think people need to, especially younger people, and in the case of the apostles, they're all in this learning process. They need to be told, hey, beware. Just tell people how it is. There are people like this all over the earth who deny the authority of God. They deny baptism and the scheme of redemption. They deny this. And you need to be warned of that. And I think sometimes we shy away from that. I asked a young man one time, I said, I was aware of a congregation where his parents were, that there were problems. And I asked the younger man, who was preaching, by the way, I said, did your grandparents ever really talk with you? No, they kind of shielded me from any problems in the church. And I thought that's so distinct from Brother Sewell, Paul, when somebody asked him, did your mom and dad ever talk to you about the problems in the church? He said, that's all we ever heard. He said, Dad didn't have any hobbies except seeing people that he didn't get to see, and you talk about difficult, and that's all the church difficulties, good things. It was just all a mixture of it at the table. And I think Dad didn't preach regularly, full time, but nobody shielded me from any difficulties. Here are people who are not doing what they ought to do. And you don't just shield young people from saying, we don't want them to know that they're hypocrites in the church. Yeah, they're hypocrites in the church, local churches. There are people who don't do what but that's not, you always keep in mind, that is never the Lord's fault. Don't blame it on the Lord. Don't blame it on the Lord's organization. Don't blame it on the Lord's design for people. It is the weakness and frailty of people, not the Lord. And make sure that we get that point across. So the Lord here, after this discussion with these Pharisees and Sadducees, and they would still just show us a sign from heaven, I could think maybe Bartholomew or somebody said, yeah, Lord, maybe you ought to do that. You know, now he's been showing everything under the sun, so pardon the pun, to everybody who had an open mind that they could see was that. So he's they do that. Then in Mark's account, let's open up to Mark 8, and I want to call your attention to something else that we'll see in just a moment. In the preceding paragraph, verse 11 through 13 of Mark 8 is where we have what we just talked about. The Pharisees asked for a sign from heaven. And then in 14 through 21 is this second set. Look, let me read it. 14, and they forgot to take bread, and they had not in the boat with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned one with another, saying, we have no bread. And Jesus, perceiving it, said unto them, why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Do ye not yet perceive, neither understand? Have ye your heart hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? Having ears, hear ye not? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves among the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces took ye up? They said, 12. And when the 7 among the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces took ye up? They said, 7. And he said to them, do ye not yet understand? Now I think it's interesting that they were somewhat slow. Then we have in verses 22 through 26, Jesus healing a person who was what? Who was blind. He did it immediately. That is, he was completely healed in one step, right? No, it took two steps, 2 stages. And there may be more to that than I'm willing to admit, but possibly the very fact that it took, he could see a little and then he could see more. Kind of like the apostles, they were seeing a little of Jesus and eventually they'd see more. At least that happens. Later on in the next little section is where Peter says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he did get it. But anyway, just put that in the back burner and let's answer our questions. We'll come back to it in a minute. On page 91, the top, Jesus rebukes the spiritual dullness of the disciples on the way to Bethsaida. After entering a boat to cross the sea, what did the disciples discover they had forgotten? That's a gimme. To take bread, yeah. With what was Jesus concerned? The leaven of the Pharisees, Sadducees, Mark's account says Herod, yeah. What did Jesus say they had forgotten? Feeding of the 5,000 as well as the feeding of the 4,000. Finally, the disciples understood Jesus was talking about what? That's right, the doctrine or the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Quoting McGarvey here, leaven, which answered to our modern yeast, was a symbol of a secret, penetrating, pervasive influence, usually of a corrupting nature. However, an exception to the rule is in the parable of the leaven, where the kingdom of heaven is likened to a leaven which a woman took and had in three bowls and so on. And it's the what am I saying? The touching, the contact of the who said something? The influence, yes. The contact, the influence, touching one another with the gas that's produced by the yeast that I'm fermenting. I couldn't think of the word. It's fermenting, and so in that sense, it's used in a good way, leaven, and how the contact by others. But usually throughout the Bible, the word leaven is from the corruption. A little leaven, what? Leaven's a whole lump. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 5. So anyway, the influence of the Pharisees was that of formalism, hypocritical ostentation, traditionalism. Of the Sadducees, sneering, rationalistic unbelief, free thought, cunning worldliness manifesting itself among the Herodians in political corruption. So he said, you beware of all of that. All right. Now, this second one is only the second miracle. I mean, the second one here in the fourth retirement. Number 2 on our page, Jesus heals a blind man at Bethsaida. Let's read that. Patty, if you would, Mark 8, 22 through 26, please.
Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him, and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again, and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away and said to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town.
All right, just go home and don't say that. Don't tell anyone. Look at verse 30. After the disciples there at Caesarea Philippi, Peter declares Jesus is the Christ of God. He says he charged them that they should tell no man of him. And then even after the transfiguration, tell the vision to no man until after the Son of Man be raised from the dead. And I think we alluded to this the other day. There were reasons for this. One is their concept of who Jesus was still unclear, and everything would be made plainer on Pentecost. But even then, not everything was understood by the apostles, the Gentiles, and so on. But he said, don't begin broadcasting everything right now. It's not yet time. And so even this man. But there's a second thing, I think, and that is the more he'd go broadcasting it. Remember, these are the periods of what? Retirement. He's trying to get away from the crowds and have more time with the apostles and just those who were diligently seeking him to have interview with him.
If he's publicized, then there's going to be more crowd.
Exactly right. He's trying to get away from the crowds right now. That's exactly right, Sandra. 2 or 3 things about, several things actually. Just looking at the text, he's blind, so obviously someone's having to lead him about. They bring to him a blind man, and they ask him, they felt like if he only did what? Touched him. He only touched him. Well, then look what Jesus does. He took hold of the blind man. He just takes him, and he brought him out of the village. Sometimes people wonder why he did that. Why did he bring him out of the village? Well, likely it goes back to the idea that what Sandra was just saying, that and going back to the end of verse 26 and the end of verse 30, that he's trying still to he's healing those, and yet there's a sense in which he's keeping some of it quiet. That's one idea. It could very well be that he is showing this person, I am devoting my energies immediately to you and you alone. And there is obviously compassion. All of those things would be true whether that's intended or not. So he brought him out of the village. And then the 2 things, the 2 stages that involved his healing. When he had spit on his eyes, he laid his hands upon him and asked him, do you see anything? Seest thou aught? Do you see anything? And he looked up, a simple term for to see. He looked up and said, I see men, for I behold them as trees walking. And most commentators understand that he evidently was not born blind, that he had seen trees, he knew what they looked like. And so here is, in a vague way, he sees people like trunks of trees walking about. He knew what trees were. And men looked like them. And then, again, here's the second stage, verse 25. Jesus laid his hands upon his eyes. Now, he first spit on them, and then laid his hands on him. And now he spit on his eyes. He looked steadfastly and was restored. He looked steadfastly. What do your translations have for that phrase? He looked up intently. Yeah, there's Greek word there, that idea is his eyes are wide, they're about, he can see distinctly, clearly, and he keeps on seeing, is the idea. And it's not like, there's one of aorist tense, I could see, but now I can see everything. I can see distinctly, I can see off in the distance, I can see clearly. So I saw all things clearly. And he sent him away to his home, saying, do not even enter into the village. All right, let's answer some of these questions, guys. Number 2, Jesus heals a blind man at Bethsaida. After arriving on the east side of the Jordan, close to where it flows into the Sea of Galilee, a man was brought to Jesus to be healed. Jesus showed his sympathy toward him by taking him out of the what? Out of the what? Village. What does the other say? Town. Okay. So he's a little bit outside of Bethsaida. What seemingly strange thing did Jesus do before asking him if he could see anything? He what? That's right. Spit on his eyes, and then also laid his hands on the man. Spit on his eye. And there are a lot of, what ifs. There are a lot of things we're not told about the fellow. A lot of assumptions are made. Some with the spittle and this is true of a lot of people who have eye diseases. They're kind of an incrustation, or maybe an ooze or something, and maybe the spittle they use, again, maybe that this is using to kind of rub and get his eyelids where they can open. But whatever the case was, he spit on him and then laid his hands. This is directly coming from me, Jesus says. The blind man could see men, but they looked like what? Trees. Yeah, trees walking. Jesus laid his hands on the man's eyes again, and immediately what happened? That's right. He looked steadfastly and could see clearly, could see everything. McGarvey mentioned the man's eyes were probably sore, and Jesus made use of saliva to soften, and so there's an assumption there, certainly. But it was our Lord's custom to give variety to the manifestation of his power, sometimes using one apparent auxiliary means and sometimes another, also healing instantly or progressively as he chose. The people might see that the healing was altogether a matter of his will. The man had evidently not been born blind, else he would not have been able to recognize men or trees by sight. For those not used to employ sight can not by it tell a circle from a square. To maintain as much privacy as possible, Jesus told the man not to enter into the what? To the town or village, but go directly to his house. Some people parallel this to the disciples. We alluded to this a moment ago. They compare it as a parallel to the disciples' imperfect seeing of Jesus, who he was. And if you look contextually, there's some strength to that argument. The event that happened immediately preceding is when they're on the boat, and Jesus is saying, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they're thinking only bread. And he has to, and then he has to remind them, remember the feeding of the 5,000? How many baskets? The 4,000? How many baskets? He reminds them of that. And it could very well be that contextually, Mark places it here to show that, that there's this progressive nature of understanding. That could be. I wouldn't make a big. I'll tell you what I do think sometimes. Yesterday when I was down at Atmore, we were talking through, just kind of glancing through, and we were there where the wise men bring you remember the 3 kinds of gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And one said the reason that they brought those 3 things, sure enough, and somebody said the reason the gold, well, that was for kings, and frankincense, well, that would have been what priest, that would be representative of his priesthood. And myrrh, that he was being embalmed in it. Well, it is true that I mentioned, it is true that he's our king. It is true he's our priest. He had to sacrifice himself. It is true that myrrh was brought in it with the spices of his burial. But I said, the Bible does not say it in clear terms. We need to be extremely careful when we ascribe reasons for things the Bible didn't say. And I listened to a fella, I listened to a fellow that I've been asked to listen up in Athens online, and he talked about how when Jesus when Jesus was raised from the dead, you remember the grave clothes were left, you remember, folded, and the napkin that was on his face. He said the reason that, there again, the reason that Jesus did that was because he is through with this old life and he's raised to walk in, just like when we're lowered in watery baptism, we're raised to walk in newness of life. And so and then he used Galatians 3, all who have been baptized into Christ to put on Christ. When I hear stuff like that, those are true statements, but to put them all together, you're making some real big jumps, some assumptions, especially on Jesus' grave clothes. Some things, when the Bible tells us the facts, what happened, we need to be content just to leave it with the facts. Other things can reveal themselves as we go, and we know, yeah, Jesus did rise for eternal and to live eternally, never to die again. And it is true that when we're baptized, we rise to walk in newness of life, and we put on Christ. But it's not like we're putting on clothes. We're trying to put on a different kind of character. But anyway, I just say that to say when we're studying and we want to parse out as much as we can, we don't want to leave anything that's there for our good, and yet we dare not assume some things that we just can't prove. I was talking to Van Cooper yesterday, and there are just so much that people assume or they think may be a novel idea that nobody's ever thought of before. And I'm coming up with it, and so look at me. It's almost an egotistical ploy. And we just need to be content with the meat and potatoes of the Scripture and try to get all that's there without going onward and assuming things that are not there. So I just say that about this. Contextually, it is true. The disciples were slow to see who Jesus was, and here it's in progressive steps. Yeah, you could make that point, but the Bible doesn't, so let's be careful. Yes, sir, Farron.
I think it's just as easily assumed that the angel that was there folded them up to tidy up the tomb.
Yeah. I think without going back, if someone had stolen the body, like the soldiers were told, then everything would have been left, And so there's no big rush when you fold them up. That makes to me more sense than the other, at least because it coincides with the story that the guards were told. You just tell them that the disciples came while we were asleep and stole the body, and they just left it ramshackle.
That took you moved too, but they left it.
Yes, that's right. Yes, sir, Len.
I have to make just two quick points on this because I think it's important. Many times that those rabbits that we chase
Yes.
when we're reading God's Word are oftentimes denominational thinking.
They are,
And
exactly
we
right.
must be very careful.
Yes.
And then oftentimes when we chase these rabbits, it takes us away from what the Scriptures are saying.
Yeah.
And the point of the truth. I was having this same conversation with another preacher this past week along the same lines, and it's distracting as you were talking about younger people earlier. It's very distracting to them. They can't see the point of the parable, the point of the miracle, whatever the case may be. They can't see that because they're trying to chase all these other rabbits.
The simple truth
Yes.
is there. One thing I was wanting to look at Paulus. Paul uses a New King James study Bible, and I've got one at home. I think it's a different edition from Paulus, but it has notes in it. And in this section, Mark 3:22 through 26, it made the point that the disciples, like we, could not see Jesus clearly. And then for us, we do not see him until the aid of the Holy Spirit. Well, most of us understand where that leads to. The so-called illumination theory, that you can read the Bible for yourself and come only so far. Then when you become saved, you accept Christ as your person. Then a second work of grace, according to Calvinists, is he gives you through the Spirit better understanding, apart from the Word. And unfortunately, some of the members of the church have bought into that you know, when we are unsaved, then we only go so far, and then once we're saved, and then they use 1 Corinthians 2. The natural man understands not the things of the Spirit, they're foolishness to him, but those that are spiritual understand all things. They'll say, well, here's the natural man, he's unsaved, and the spiritual is... That's not what he's talking about in 1 Corinthians 2. He's talking about someone who is unaided by divine revelation versus a person who is. Not one who is unsaved and saved, but without divine wisdom, without the gospel, this is where you are. With the gospel, this is where you are. And the point I'm making from all that is we are enveloped by a lot of teaching that, as Landon mentioned, it will lead you on rabbits, I guess, like I've just done in class. But it will lead you away from, and the conclusions that are drawn from those rabbits that are taken are false. And what we can know is that Jesus healed the man in stages, and his power is at his own will. Okay, can you believe the time? It's 17 after. So we have the man there. Then, I will say this and then we'll stop. What happens after this is we're going northward to Caesarea Philippi, where he asked, okay, we have the Pharisees who say, show us a sign. And others are, you know, could this be the son of David? Who do you say? Who do men say I am? And who do you say? And then we'll have Peter's declaration. All right, comment or question? Anybody? Anyone? All right. Enjoyed being with you, and hope our study has been helpful as we get another glimpse of who Jesus is.